Hello, everybody. We're back, and so I left our old file up here because we're going to essentially do the second part of variables, which is numbers. So we've been working with letters and words, and now we're going to go to numbers. Um, Numbers are, again, because this is a scripting language, a little more forgiving than maybe your standard programming language. And well, let's just go to it. Let's do a simple print statement. So I'm going to click over here and I'm going to type in print and then print the number 5. So last time we printed out our nice little string here, and now we're just printing 5. And as you can see, 5 will come up fine. But what type of 5 is it? Because as you can see before, we had quotes around what we wanted to write. Well, actually, these single quotes around what we wanted to write. So if I were to put quotes around 5, I would still get that same 5. But believe it or not, those are going to be two separate 5s. One is going to recognize as a number. So before, when we didn't put quotes around it, like in terms of person, that meant that it was a variable. If you don't put quotes around a number, like 5, it treats it as a number. In fact, I don't know if you saw that, but see that, look at that here, is that it's going to say this is an int, meaning this is an integer. And that's why you can't name variables with starting with a number, because it immediately tries to turn them into numbers. Well, likewise, you can have some problem with it. So let's say I want to write 5 and then dogs, like I own 5 dogs or something like that. Now what I'm doing here is I'm trying to match a int with a string. So it doesn't know what to do. It has to take a guess, because it has to say, well, am I adding 5 to something else, or am I concatenating like we did up here with 2 strings? And you will get this weird exception error. And I don't know if you'll get this. We tried it in class today, and I think we got a slightly different answer, but it should say roughly this. Unsupported operand types for plus, int and string. It may just say you're trying to add int to a string. In this case, it's saying unsupported operand type. The operand is actually the plus sign, and then your the plus sign is your operator. The operands are 5 and dogs. So what it's basically saying is you can't mix and match these things. I can't. Some scripting languages will automatically concatenate them and turn them both into strings. Python will not. So the other thing, as you can see, I keep clicking on this X and I think I'm trying to get rid of it. But the reason why that pops up is actually because we're still running. So see up here where where we had this little play or continue button. This black button, the stop button, is active, so it means that it's running in the background even though my command prompt might be there. Oh, there it is. So if I exit out of it, I'm fine. You can also hit that stop button. It would cancel everything as well. So if I want to say 5 dogs, then I definitely have to put the quotes in there. And again, I'll go ahead and push play. I didn't actually saw it play. I know some of you might be like, why is it looks like attached to me? It depends. Everybody has their own way. If we're doing C#, it'd say build. If we're doing C++, some of the compilers would say compile. Some of them, and I've used ones that say play. I just go ahead and say play, because why have a pause and a stop without a play, right? All right. So anyways, back to this. So now we're writing it correctly. But that's not what we want to do today. Today we actually want to investigate numbers. In fact, let me just delete all that. So let's say 5 plus 3. Well, we know that 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. So if I press this, sure enough, look, it doesn't write the 5 or the 3. It actually adds those two together as if they're variables. like essentially a 5 variable equaling 5 and a 3 variable equaling 3. Now we've gotten rid of the concatenation and replace it with good old-fashioned addition. So we're using the plus sign up here is doing a different thing than the plus sign down here. But likewise, as we did up there, we could say, just to be brutally obvious with this, we could call a variable 5 and then say 5 plus 3. That is fine. If you press play, you should get 8 again, because it's just adding a variable to a real number. And if you notice this, and this is just a small thing, it's just 8, right? It's not 8 period, it's not 8.0, it's 8. And the reason being is that these guys, like we hovered over before, are considered ints. If I type in 5.0, this is no longer an integer, it is a floating point value. And if you've used any other programming languages before, you'll realize that ints and floats don't necessarily match, and sometimes it throws the programming language. So what is it going to do here? Well, let's hover over that 5 again, and all of a sudden you see that 5 has been turned to float. And float, I don't know if I've just said it, but I'll say it again. If I did, float means floating point number. Sorry, I got a brain freeze there. But essentially it means decimal. That's kind of the old school way of saying it. Some of the more modern languages don't use or don't highlight float as much as they used to. But that is, if you go to the old-fashioned languages, they all do decimals and they call them floats. Or floating point decimal, that works too. But as you can see, when I hover over the 3, it's an int. Now, some compilers in programming languages, this would give you an error. And luckily, we're in Python, and Python is a forgiving master. So let's go ahead and hit play, and it says, oh, it's 8 still, so it adds them correctly, but now it puts the 0.0 in there, meaning it's going to convert that outside, convert that 3 to a float just for the purposes of adding it, and then your result is now float. This can have a host of varieties. Let's do some more. I'm going to put 5 divided by 3. And this is a tricky thing, because this should give us, what, 1 2/3 or 1.66666, to all the way to 7. So as now you can see, even though it didn't write the points, it only wrote 8.0 last time, it keeps a long set of decimals to that. So it's fairly accurate. Now let's change it back to 5. Now, if you're using Python 2.7 or excuse me, 3 and beyond, you're going to be fine, and it should give you the same answer. If you're using Python 2.7 or before, you're going to get an oddity. So let me click here because I forgot which one I have. Okay, yeah, I think I have 3.5 here. So it gives me the right ones. If you see at this point that it gives you a 1, that means you're using 2.7, and it's not converting. See, let me exit out of this again. See how that's an int? It actually converted it to a float so that it could do this division. If you're working in the 2.7 or below, what you're going to end up getting is 1, and the reason being is it's going to chop off the decimal, because remember, integers are only whole numbers, so it treats 5 like a whole number and 3 like a whole number. So when you divide 5 by 3, it's 1.6667, but it says I'm only doing whole, I'm not looking past the decimal, so it chops off everything beyond that decimal point, leaving just the 1. But if you guys are all using Python 3, you're safe, you're good, you don't have to worry about as much. Alrighty, and let's do a little bit more. Let's say 5 times 3 plus 7 plus 3 star star 2. And my first thing to say is pause the tape and try to figure out what this is going to give us. And so let's break this down in terms of answering. Python, like all languages, treats this like a normal math problem. So what's the normal math problem? Well, we're going to do multiplication before we do addition. We're going to do division before we do addition. And then we're going to go left to right to determine division or multiplication. So if we have a multiplication and division symbol and they're right next to each other, one that on the left goes first. It really doesn't matter. That's the nice commutativity of division and multiplication. But what I want to point out before I do that is that this is not multiplication. You may have been taught in 188 this, but they probably used this symbol, 3, 2, or 3 to the second, which is 9. 3 to the power of 2 is another way of saying it. This is the way Python does it. It does a double star, meaning that it's 3 to the second power. And powers go first. Then mult, we'll say mult and division, then addition and subtraction. Alright, so now this gives us some clue. We're going to do this part first, which should give us 9. Skip over the pluses because the multiplication comes next. 5 divided by 3, which is 1.67. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take... Yeah. Yeah, actually I am. Sorry. Well, no, because you guys already figured this out. So 1.66667, and then we have a 9 here, and then we can just go left to right. So 1.667 plus 7 is 8.667, plus 9 is going to be 17.667. So let me see if I'm right. Yep. Except for, oh, look at that. See, now that is the disadvantage of using a float, is that eventually if you do enough do enough calculations, you start seeing just a little bit of error creep into it, what we refer to as round off error. And we're going to address this later. But for this program, not a huge difference, right? Because you know we're talking beyond the millionth of a percent of error. You know what I mean? So we're not going to have to worry about it. But when we start doing loops and things of that nature, this is going to become important, and we may have to switch our style. But again, we'll talk about that in another video. Just keep that in the back of your brain. So this is basically how the mathematicals works. Some people were asking in my other class, you know, what happens if we know how to change, you know, numbers into strings, but how do we go the reverse way? Excuse me, the numbers. Well, what happens if we want a number to turn into a string? They do have this simple value of print string of 5, and then we can concatenate it with let's just do the dogs again. That was similar. And this should be happy. I don't see, I'm not getting any squiggly lines or anything, so let's take a look and see it. Oops, the only thing I forgot was the good old space. But as you can see now, it took 5, which was an int, and turned it into a string just by typing in that str. So we can do it more correctly by putting the space and rerunning it, and then we get the 5 dogs. Okay, I think that is it for what I want to do with numbers, but I'm going to make probably one small more video for chapter 2, and then we'll come back.